Acacia, tell us your name and where you live.
Okay. My name is Acacia Stuckel, and I live in Linton, North Dakota.
And so I don't forget later, tell me what your job title is.
I am an extension agent for NDSU Extension.
And what specialty, is there a specialty or certain duties that you're assigned to in your job?
As for my job, I work as an extension agent here in Emmons County. So my territory is the entire Emmons County area. And my focus is working with youth, doing 4-H and youth development programming, as well as family and community wellness programming.
Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Did you grow up in this area?
I did not grow up in Emmons County, but I didn't grow up too far away. I actually grew up, our farm was just on the border of McIntosh and Logan County. So our farm was in McIntosh County. Our address was Fredonia, which is in Logan County. So our farm was 5 miles south of Fredonia.
What kind of farm was it?
The farm that I grew up on was diversified. We were a dairy farm. We also had livestock. We had beef, livestock, and we also had small grains.
And what type of chores did you have as a child growing up?
Well, I only actually lived on the farm until the end of my 5th grade year. We ended up having to move to town due to too much water. And so my job was feeding the calves every day during chores when we milked cows, was feeding the calves and all the other little farm animals. Sometimes we had pigs, and so we had to feed the pigs. I was just starting to help my dad more as far as the grain part of it. So I was learning how to drive a tractor and starting to mow and that sort of thing, mow hay.
So how'd you feel when you had to move to the city?
Well, I moved to a really big city of Fredonia. So it had a population of 50 people. So it wasn't quite as big of a transition, but it was hard because we didn't have all the animals. We didn't have our sheep and our goats and things like that that we had on the farm, or our horse. So we did miss that. But otherwise, we adjusted because we weren't too far away.
And then where did you go to high school?
I went to high school. I went to elementary school. All my schooling was in Cullum, North Dakota, which was 10 miles east of where our farm was.
And when you were like in high school, did you think about going to college? Did you think about what your career would be in the future?
I did. I mean, I always knew I would go into higher education. I would, go to college. I didn't necessarily know where I would go or what I'd do. I thought about nursing and thought about teaching, and ended up at NDSU, and now I'm here with the Extension Service. So it wasn't really my plan, but it's a good fit and I like it.
What was your major in?
I majored in communication. So I didn't really necessarily know what I was going to do. I didn't have necessarily a plan. I worked with Michael Miller at the NDSU Germans from Russia Library, I should say, NDSU Library's Germans from Russia Heritage Collection, and got really excited and interested in the work that they were doing there. So after I graduated college, I was able to get a full-time position at the library there, and worked there for 5 years. And I got connected and involved with Extension we organized a couple tours called the Dakota Memories Heritage Tours. And that was really my first taste of physically ever working with Extension. And I've always really enjoyed the outreach portion of the job that I had when I was with the Germans from Russia Heritage Collection. And so working with the folks at Extension and coordinating those tours and getting involved in this area, when I had the opportunity to move back closer to home, be closer to my family, it was kind of a leap of faith. I wasn't sure what I was getting into, but I'm very happy that I did. So.
And what was the allure of leaving Fargo and moving back to an agricultural community?
Well, when you grow up in a small area and you're a small, rural area, and you're connected to agriculture and your roots, I think that when you leave, you still have this desire to want to, maybe be, or these ties to want to be back to where you kind of grew up. And I didn't really have that as much until I had children. And once I had children, I started having, the, urge, so to speak, to want to be able to raise them in a rural area so they could understand what agriculture and how important rural life was.
And this is something you and your husband both shared?
Yeah, my husband actually grew up in the Jamestown area. He's on a farm by Courtney, North Dakota. And so he also really liked coming back here. He really likes hunting and fishing. So for him, this is a paradise to live back here. But he agreed just a lot of the same values that we have or share, raising our children in a rural area. And working with Extension gives me those opportunities.
Why don't we talk about your work with Extension? Why don't first we'll start specifically with 4-H. What type of activities are there available for children of both genders in the 4-H program?
Okay, so 4-H actually is a very broad, we call them project areas. You have so many different project areas that youth can pursue. It used to be that there was kind of the stereotype that 4-H was for farm kids, because at one time it very much so was. It was developed because researchers wanted to get that information, that university research, to farmers, and they weren't always wanting to adapt this new information. And when they started these 4-H clubs, they were able to bring that education to the youth, and they found that farmers started to adopt that information. And so it's kind of the concept was back bringing that education to the rural areas. But now 4-H is so much more than just that focus. It's not the boys clubs and the girls club. So 4-H really gives youth a lot of opportunity to learn life skills. It's hands-on. The motto is to make better best, never let it rest. And till the good gets better and the better gets best. And really, you're teaching mastery. So maybe a 4-Her wants to learn how to paint, and they start off painting. But, after 6 years of painting, they really can create a masterpiece. So, if they have kind of a niche for arts and things like that. That's one thing our rural areas we don't always have in our schools, or we don't have some of those opportunities. So I find that 4-H really gives some of those kids an outlet to show their artistic or their creative side to do things. Maybe they're really into science. STEM is huge. 4-H really tries to work hard on promoting STEM and science things. Every year the 4-H, National 4-H a group releases a national science project, and we try to do those in the school. So, whether you're interested in science or arts types of things, and we still do cooking. We still try to get those blue ribbon cookies for the county fair, or maybe an award-winning pie. Showing livestock, that's still big. Whether it's maybe showing a rabbit for those that live in town and they still want that opportunity to learn how to take care of animals, it gives them that opportunity to somebody showing a heifer at the fair. So there's lots of different opportunities for 4-Hers, whether it's in terms of animals, in terms of arts, science. The possibilities are really endless. One of the things that I really like is the leadership opportunities that 4-H gives youth. I work with a lot of different groups, and we always hear that, one of the things that is missing is civic engagement for youth. And I feel like 4-H really gives some of those opportunities and gives those skills for tomorrow's leaders. Our kids now will be tomorrow's leaders. So 4-H is an opportunity to teach them how to be a good leader. We have our communication arts, which is basically public speaking. And it's one of my favorite times of the year is watching these kids get up and speak in front of people, because no matter whatever job you do, you're going to have to communicate. Even if it's not in person, maybe it'll be written communication, but you have to communicate. And I also judge the science fairs every year in the local area, and I can always pick out 4-Hers because they shake my hand right away, and they tell me their name, and they have more of a calm and collective interview with me because they've been interviewed before. When we do our county fair, we do our achievement days, they're interview judged, and so they're asked questions, and they know how to talk about the work they've done. And so to me, that's really an exciting life skill that we can give our youth.
Do you think that in your experience in 4-H from when you were young to now, do you think that you had talked about sort of like the change in emphasis maybe for females, for women, and the skills that might be 4-H might be offering now that they didn't used to offer? Have you seen a growth in 4-H that way?
You know, from when I started in my position 6 years ago, there hasn't been obviously a change, but I know that leaders talk about, and you know, probably not our current leaders, but maybe their parents. A lot of times we're working with third or fourth generation 4-H families, and you know, their grandmothers were taught a lot of sewing, which is a great life skill. They were taught sewing and cooking, but they were segregated. You know, there was the boys 4-H clubs and there was the girls 4-H clubs, and now there isn't that. I mean, there is you're a 4-H club, boys and girls, and you do projects together. So that means that the boys also can sew and learn to crochet, and the girls can, you know, maybe do woodworking. In the past, that might not have been a typical project area. So I think that there's a definite shift in culture and time in general as far as what is considered women's work.
How about in the community in general? I mean, have you seen a change since you were a kid, and maybe with your mom talking about things? You said women's work, women's things. Do you think that's changed over the course of time, perception that way?
I do. I really do think that. I mean, even, you know, I like to think I'm not that old, but growing up in a rural area, most of the times, there was many times that if you had a family, the mom stayed at home, especially on a farm family. There wasn't a lot of moms that worked in town. Nowadays, you see both the husband and wife working in town because they have to make ends meet, whereas I feel like as a child, it was always the mother, I shouldn't say always, but it was more common that the mother stayed home with the children, and you kind of grew up that way. So you maybe learn to do more of those things in the kitchen with baking and things like that that aren't always the opportunity now because both parents are working and you don't have that time, you know, with your parents per se always, or your grandmother. You know, in a rural area, a lot of times your families for a couple generations were there, and that's not always the case anymore, that even the grandmothers are maybe still working. So I think you maybe don't notice, or you don't have some of those interactions that you used to have with some of the skills that you used to get, and I feel like that's where 4-H helps, you know, kind of fill some of those gaps by giving kids opportunities to learn some of those things. I mean, when I was a kid, we would go to my grandma's and she would, you know, today we're going to crochet, or today we're going to do this, and so it was like having my grandma was like having our own 4-H club. But not everybody has those experiences. I also noticed just growing up in Fredonia, when you would go to town, well, first of all, everybody used to speak German in the cafe, so I didn't understand, obviously. I still wouldn't understand what they said. I thought that when you grew up and you got older, you learned German, like it was a coming to age sort of thing that just happened. But everybody always referred to the women as Mrs. So-and-so and Mrs. They didn't have names, and in church cookbooks and those sorts of things, even looking at different, you know, old 4-H records, it was Mrs. So-and-so. And I feel like they didn't always get their own identity like they do now. I mean, my mom and I just had a conversation the other day. We were trying to remember one of the cooks in the Fredonia Cafe, and we were talking about the same person, but we couldn't think of her name or her first name. And I said, do you think we ever knew it? I mean, did we even know she had a first name? Because it was always Mrs. whatever. And so I think that there's a lot of things that are different from when I was a child growing up in a rural area to now for women. I mean, your jobs, the roles of women have changed so much. You used to only ever see, you know, maybe teachers and the hospital type of setting. And now when you look at agriculture, your agronomist might be a woman. You know, there's you going to the elevator, it might be a woman helping you. There's a lot of women in agriculture, actually paid positions now that I guess growing up as a child were always kind of considered a men's job.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the ladies mentioned that a little bit older woman, mentioned that one of the things that bothered her was that the farm was always referred to as his farm, never their farm, and that it was always Joe Smith's farm that we're going to visit, not Joe and Mary Smith's farm. That it was never the woman who said, you know, it wasn't that equal partnership where you would get that name recognition.
No, but it didn't mean that the workload wasn't the same. I mean, most of the time the women were, the cream check was the money that they had to buy everything that they needed for their family and their, you know, their children, whatever that they if they needed a dress for a special occasion, if they didn't sew it. So they worked very, very hard, but didn't necessarily get the naming rights to their legacy.
The other thing I've noticed the past few years as we've done these projects is that the women on the farm are very similar to the soccer moms in the cities. They still have to run the kids, even though the distances are much farther. The kids all have activities, they have to take care of that, as well as maybe their job and their farm responsibilities. So even as an added layer of work for them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's women now that maybe work in town at probably to get insurance and have raising families, as well as working just as hard still at home when they get home in the evening, whether it's with livestock or with a grain operation or whatnot.
You had mentioned the 4-H side of your job. Tell us about the other side of your job, the other things you do with other people in the community.
Okay, so another responsibility I have is the program area called Family and Community Wellness. And so I work with, I like to say that population is everybody. And so sometimes I might be doing programming as far as getting information out to people. Maybe it's on nutrition, maybe it's on some sort of specific topic at a senior center. One of the things I do is I co-teach a class called Stepping On, which is a fall prevention class. It's for people 65 and older that have a risk of falling. We know in a rural area that being able to stay in our homes is so important because we don't always have those facilities that a larger town has. We don't always have all the public transportation options and things like that. So if somebody can't live at home and you know they a lot of times have to move outside of the area or go to the nursing home. And so in terms of cost savings, it's twofold. We want, you want to keep these people at home. So that's that's one example of something that I teach. I work a lot with the Tri-County Tourism Alliance when you think of terms of different community work that we do. And that's the counties of Emmons, Logan, and McIntosh. And we're working together to promote and preserve the German-Russian heritage and to become and make this a tourism destination. That work came about when I was working with Michael Miller at the Germans from Russia Heritage Collection. And after we had organized the first Dakota Memories Heritage Tour, and we had a wait list. I had people calling asking if they could sleep in their cars because they wanted to come. I had comments that they wanted to go behind the Iron Curtain, that they never had a chance to go to Hague and Strasbourg, and this was their opportunity. And we came back and we said, wow, this is like a niche. Like we have to help these people figure out what they can do to market it. And we brought several different folks from different state agencies together. Eventually our first meeting was in Wishick. It used to be a restaurant, Prairie Winds, I believe. And we had a meeting and we said, okay, what can we do to help get these three counties to work together to promote their heritage resources? And since then we've done a lot of work, published books. We're working on documentaries. We're doing lots of exciting work to promote our heritage and culture and hopefully increase economic development opportunities as well. So that's one of the things that I get to do in my job.
When you hear the older women talk, let's say, about what it was like to be a farm wife back then, what do you think the biggest change has been for that in being on the farm? What has been the biggest change in the last 30, 40 years?
Oh goodness. Well, I think that agriculture has changed so much in general in 30 to 40 years. Agricultural practices, the way that they did things when I was growing up on a farm aren't even the same as they're doing things now. So I think it's sometimes hard to compare apples to apples in that sense. I mean, the equipment's bigger. You know, the inputs are so much more than when I was growing up. And so as far as women's, I guess, role or change 30 to 40 years ago, is I feel like they probably aren't, the work that they do probably isn't any different, that they're not working any more or any less than they were 30 to 40 years ago, if they were working, you know, side by side on the farm with their husband or whatnot. But they maybe are more included with the operation. They've maybe always been part of the decision-making component, but some of them haven't. Some haven't been allowed to be part of that. And I feel like there's been a shift with allowing women to make decisions with the farm, or maybe publicly admitting that your wife maybe is making some of those decisions. You know, we notice, or, you know, you still see a lot of meetings that we have with producers. You see a lot of men come to the meetings, but I feel like you see a lot more coming with their wife. If they're an active participant, or, you know, in the operation, a lot of times they're coming and making these decisions. One of the programs that we do at with our NDSU Extension does is called Design Your Succession Planning, and really working to get that that transition in place, because we know that they can't do this forever. And a lot of times there's people farming with their son or their daughter, and so we work with people. We do a class, and we see a lot of husbands and wives coming together. And one of the things that I always find interesting is that we do a little activity, and it kind of seems elementary, but we'll say, where do you see, you know, yourself in 10 years? What do you picture retirement as? And we had a couple, and one said, well, I plan on living on the farm and, you know, helping out. And the wife wanted to move to town so she could be closer to church. And they were laughing because when they, you know, shared their answers, they had never shared their vision with each other. And so I think some of those classes and things like that, we really, I feel like in Extension, promote them to both males and females, you know, because they're both part of that decision in finding their successor, so to speak. You know, maybe the successor isn't the son. Maybe they didn't have a son. Maybe it's the daughter that wants to be an active part in that succession plan, or the transition of, or the next generation of their legacy on their farm. So working with programs like that, I feel like we work equally with men and women. I wasn't in Extension 30 years ago, so I can't say what their programs were like, but I don't feel that, you know, women were always necessarily probably included in some of those decisions. And so I feel like we are well aware that they are, and I feel like we really try to include everybody when we do programming.
When you get with your friends who are also young mothers, and what are some of the topics you talk about, and what are some of the things that you think you and your friends are worried about in the near future as far as it comes to agriculture?
You know, I work with different teachers, and I'm friends with different teachers, and I'm in the schools a lot, and I do different types of programming, and I do a lot of nutrition programming, and you know, where your food comes from and things like that. And every year I'll have kids that don't know what food group an egg is. You know, and they'll say, is it a vegetable? I mean, it's one of my favorite stories, because to me, you know, living, you know, here in Linton, we're rural America, and to have a 5th grader say, well, an egg is a vegetable, it really makes me think, wow. You know, there is such a disconnect with agriculture. And, you know, an egg is not a vegetable, and I say, and I've had to say it more than once, do you plant a chicken in your garden and get an egg? And they look at me so silly, and they say, no. But, you know, I mean, it's just sometimes even living in a rural area, they're not always living on the farm. They're not necessarily have animals, and they're not maybe exposed to that. Some of the things that I feel like growing up on a farm, I just learned and I take for granted, and I feel like as a mother, I really try to talk to my children about where their food comes from and what food group is and where does dairy come from? What is a dairy product? Because while I live in a rural area, my kids don't actually live on a farm. And so I feel like that's, for me, is a concern, is just having youth understand where their food comes from and what agriculture is and how important agriculture is to absolutely every single thing that they do.